Well, I don't know about you, but I had a really fun-filled afternoon. To watch Jamie perform in a show in Fayetteville. And I got to juggle water balloons that didn't seal very well. It was a lot of fun. Be looking for the video sometime coming near to you. But anyway, it was a good afternoon for us. But hope you didn't waste it like take a nap or something lame like that. The period of the Judges was the darkest period in Israel's history. It's best summed up by Judges 17:6 and Judges 21:25, which both say exactly the same thing. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. Where there are no moral absolutes, where there is no leadership that urges people to do what is right, no one who will stand up and fight for what is true, honorable, and pure, there can be no peace. If I were to ask you, who was the last judge of Israel, what would your answer be? Well, you probably would go ahead and you would look back into the book of Judges and you would see, okay, the last person to be called a judge is Samson. So Samson must be the right answer. But that is not, in fact, the right answer. The last of the judges was named Samuel. He was the last of the judges and the first of the prophets. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. There is a whole bunch of information about Samuel in our Bibles. We have comparatively little information about all of the other judges. The most we have is the 4 chapters on Samson. However, most of the judges don't even have an entire chapter to themselves in the book of Judges. Some of them barely have a paragraph. There's a couple of them that it has one verse about them, and that was it. So Samuel, though, nearly the whole book of 1 Samuel is about Samuel. So if you would open up your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 3. It starts with God's promise to Hannah. Hannah also makes a promise to God, and Samuel is the result of that promise. Each one fulfills their promise that they made to the other, and it's all good. Hannah promised God that if he gave her a child, a son, that she would give him back to the Lord. And so God fulfills his end, she fulfills her end of the promise. That means that Samuel was raised in the tabernacle. I want you to think back to the church building that you attended church in when you were small, when you were growing up. Okay, for some of you, it's this building right here. I understand that. For some of you, it might be the museum downtown. For me, it was in San Antonio. But can you imagine living at that church building? I mean, not just you felt like you lived there, but actually living at the church building. I remember when I was in 4th grade, I thought I did live at the church building. You see, I was attending school at a school known as Christian Heritage School, and my mom was one of the secretaries at the school. And the school happened to be located in the church building that I normally attended church at. And so one of my school classes was in the same room as one of my Bible class, as my Bible class at church. And I remember on Wednesdays, especially, on Wednesdays we would get there at 7:15 in the morning because that's when my mom had to be there. And sometimes we wouldn't leave the church building until 8:30 or 9 o'clock that night. I thought I lived at the church building. I mean, it was just that way, until after services about Wednesday night. But Samuel really did spend his whole life at the place of worship. This evening I want us to begin a study of the life of Samuel. Now then, since 69 or so weeks ago, we talked about the first couple of chapters of 1 Samuel. Remember, it was Mother's Day 2017. We talked about Hannah. Okay, yeah, you remember that, sure. It was only a little over a year ago. Anyhow, since we did that, I want us to start tonight with the call of Samuel in 1 Samuel chapter 3. Let's begin by reading 1 Samuel 3, verses 1 through 10. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his own place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel, and he said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So he went and lay down. And the Lord called again, "Samuel." And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant hears.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. And the Lord came and stood, calling as at other times, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant hears." So we begin the story with God calling Samuel. But to understand the story, we need to know a little bit of information about Eli. Okay, Eli is the same Eli that was priest when Hannah was praying and her lips were moving but no sound was coming out of her mouth, and he assumed that she was drunk. That tells you a little bit about the state of Israel at that time and all. But a little bit about Eli. Eli was an old man. Very old, in fact, it would seem. And more than that, his eyesight wasn't so good. In fact, it wasn't very good at all. He couldn't hardly see at all. But even though he was old, even though his eyesight was failing, he was still trying to serve God as best he could. He was still ministering in the tabernacle. He was still doing what he could. He was still trying to be as good a servant of God as he possibly could. There's a very important lesson in that. And that lesson is simply this: you never get old enough to retire from your service to God. You never have too many physical ailments so that you can't serve God. We need to understand that. But anyway, a little bit of information about Samuel. Whereas Eli was an old man, Samuel was a young man. In fact, he probably wasn't even a quote-unquote man, at least not yet. Maybe he had only been at the temple for a few years. Certainly, he was no older than 12, because in verse 1 of chapter 3 it says, "Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli." The boy Samuel. In other words, he had not reached that age where the Jews do what's known as a bar mitzvah, where he takes a step from becoming a boy to becoming a man. And that typically is around the 12 years old. So he's certainly less than 12. And he slept in the tabernacle with the Ark of the Covenant. Now, when you go to college, one of the big things you have to worry about is your roommate, right? You don't want to get a bad roommate. Samuel had a roommate named Jehovah. Talk about the pressure to clean up after yourself, right? But no, he slept in the tabernacle with the Ark of the Covenant. Now, only Levites, though, were supposed to go into the tabernacle, though, and Samuel was from the tribe of Ephraim. So how do we explain that? I don't know. But I'm not going to tell God He can't make an exception when He wants to. Maybe Eli had actually adopted Samuel so that he could be a priest and from the tribe of Levi. I don't know how it worked. But the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. Again, he was less than 12, so therefore he was not a man, so to speak. But it also tells us in verse 1, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. That, I think, sums up and goes back to that big characteristic of the judges that we see in Judges 17:6 and 21:25. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did what they wanted to do. If I thought something was right, I did it. If you didn't think it was right, too bad for you. And that was just the way things went. Well, let's talk now a little bit about the call. 3 times God calls to Samuel. 3 times. And 3 times Samuel thinks that it's Eli calling him. Well, you got to put yourself in Samuel's shoes. He is in the tabernacle, and he hears a noise or something. It sounds like it's calling him. Who's he going to assume it is? Well, of course, he's going to assume it's Eli. Have you ever been lying awake at night in your house, and you hear a strange noise, and you wonder, what is that? Last weekend, when Monica and Jamie had gone to Harding for Black and Gold Day, I was laying in our bed, and I know I heard a door slam. So I was like, this is not good. Did I not lock the doors? So I got up and I went and I investigated and everything. Didn't see any, all the doors were locked. Everything was fine. And as I was walking back down the hallway, I heard the noise again and I figured it out. It was our ice maker. When it puts the ice out, it sounds just like a door shutting. It's kind of weird. But and when you're late at night and you can't sleep and your brain is going 1,000,000 miles a minute, there's going to be some imagination taking place as well. Or maybe you have a screen door or a storm door and it doesn't quite latch, and a gust of wind comes and blows it open. That can be a scary thing too at night. Anyway, point is, Samuel hears this noise. He hears somebody calling him, and so he assumes that it's Eli. Only natural. Well, Eli figures it out. He may be old, but he is sharp as a tack. Only took him 3 tries, right? So he tells Samuel what to do the next time. And so the 4th time that God calls, Samuel knows what to do. And mostly what he does is that Samuel listens. Follow along as I read verses 11 through 14. Then the Lord said to Samuel, "Behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel at which the 2 ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. On that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. And I declare to him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever." So what was the message? Basically, Eli's priesthood is over. I mean, that's pretty much what you can get out of that, isn't it? Eli's priesthood is over. He's done. Eli knew of his son's sin. Look back at chapter 2, verses 12 through 17. Let's see what Eli's son's sin was. Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. Uh-oh, that doesn't sound good. They did not know the Lord. The custom of the priests with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest servant would come while the meat was boiling, with a three-pronged fork in his hand, and he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot, and all that the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. This is what they did at Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Moreover, before the fat was burned, the priest's servants would come and say to the man who was sacrificing, "Give meat for the priest to roast. For he will not accept boiled meat from you, but only raw." And if the man said to him, "Let them burn the fat first, and then take as much as you wish," he would say, "No, you must give it now, and if not, I will take it by force." Thus the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord, for the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. Eli knew what his sons were doing, but he apparently didn't do anything or enough, if anything, to correct them. And as a result of this, look again very carefully at verse 14. "Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever." This is another one of those things that we might call an unforgivable sin, an unpardonable sin. Not even the best of sacrifices could make up for how they were treating the Lord's offering. And remember, these aren't just people who are brand new to the priesthood, that they weren't real sure what they were supposed to do or anything. These are Eli's sons. Eli's been a priest for a long time. His sons have been raised to be priests, and they knowingly violated what God told them to do. When we raise our kids today, it's important that we do a good job. Some folks say that, you have to, if you want to be a cool parent, you got to let the kids learn on their own. Kind of just let them make their own mistakes and everything. So, Hartman clan, we're going to pull those plug protectors up there so that when Kean has his fingers wet from in his mouth, he crawls over there, whatever, he's going to stick his wet finger in the outlet there so he learns not to do it. That work for you? No! That's silly. And in fact, the parenting manual written to us by the Father would argue against that approach to parenting. You don't let your kids make their own. You do what you can to protect them from it. So if Eli's priesthood is over, the implied message is that Samuel's priesthood is beginning. Since Eli's priesthood was over, there had to be another priest. Somebody else had to be brought up, and it sure wasn't going to be Eli's biological sons. So it was maybe Eli's adopted son, Samuel or something. That had to be the most logical choice. Even though he was not a Levite, technically, the priesthood had become very corrupt anyhow. Eli's two sons, that was just the tip of the iceberg, what they were doing to the offering of God and all. But we'll talk more about that later on in our series of lessons. Well, God calls Samuel. Samuel listens to God, and we are told that, verse 15, Samuel lay until morning. I would imagine he didn't sleep a whole lot more. This is a very serious message that he has been given. Then we have Eli's response. Verses 15 through 18. Samuel lay until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord. And Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. But Eli called Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son." And he said, "Here I am." And Eli said, What was it that he told you? Do not hide it from me. May God do so to you and more also if you hide anything from me of all that he told you. So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. And he said, "It is the Lord. let him do what seems good to him. Get the feeling Samuel doesn't want to tell. I get the feeling when Eli asked maybe the first time, he says, "Oh, nothing. Don't worry about it. It's all good. Don't worry. You're fine. It's all good. Don't worry about it." And Eli knows something's wrong. He says, No. I want you to tell me everything. Well, Samuel doesn't want to tell because Samuel knows that later on the Greeks are going to come up with an idea that you kill the bearer of bad news. Because if you kill the bearer of bad news, then you've killed the news, right? If they tell you something bad has happened and you kill them, then their words aren't true, right? That's how it works. No. But that's what the Greeks would do anyway. Maybe he's afraid that Eli will be upset with him. Maybe he's afraid that Eli will say, "Well, you know what? If I'm not going to be priest anymore, and my sons aren't going to be priests after me, then you're not going to be a priest, Samuel. Just forget it. You're done. We're done." And all. Well, so Samuel probably doesn't really want to tell. But Eli forces it out of him. He forces it out of him with an oath. "May God deal with you," he says. This is the strongest oath possible. It's similar maybe to what we would call perjury, only this is worse. Because it's not just a question of, well, if you lie under oath, you get put in jail or have to pay a fine or something like that. This is before God himself. This is Matthew 10:28. "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell." So this is a very serious matter. And Eli wants Samuel to know that even though he is still young, even though he's still just a boy, he better tell the truth. He better tell exactly what God told him. And so Samuel does. He tells him everything. And you know, for all of Eli's faults, all of his bad parenting, we might say, that he must have done, Eli's response is beautiful. He's God. His will be done. Compare that with what it could have, how he could have reacted, like the Greeks did. You know, kill the bearer of bad news. Eli could have done that. Or compare that with how you might have reacted if you had two sons that had cost you your career. I mean, just think about that. I mean, how upset would you be with them? Compare that with how Jesus reacted. In Matthew 26:39, going a little further, he fell in the Garden of Gethsemane. He fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. May this cup be taken from me. But yet not as I will, but as you will." Eli's response sounds remarkably similar to Jesus' prayer that night in the Garden of Gethsemane. Let's read the last 3 verses of chapter 3. "And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord appeared again at Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord." From this moment on, God blesses Samuel. And Samuel, in return, is a very faithful and responsible prophet and judge, never letting even one word of the Lord fall to the ground. Samuel is the first judge that we can say with every bit of certainty that his territory was the entire nation of Israel. Now, how do we know that? Well, there's the magic words up here, from Dan to Beersheba. You see those words? It's talking about all of Israel. God can use us no matter what our age is. We can be as young as 3, which possibly was Samuel's age when he was taken to the tabernacle. We can be as old as 969, which was Methuselah's age when he died. And every age in between and before and after, God can use us. If we will just allow Him to, we can be used in service of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. See, someone else knew that His work wasn't done until He died, and that was Jesus. He knew that His mission was not complete until He was on the cross, and 3 days later He rose from the dead. In the same way, none of our jobs are done. We oftentimes hear people who get dramatically sick and then they recover say, well, I guess it just wasn't my time yet. Folks, as long as you have breath in your lungs, it's not your time to quit. It's not your time to end your service to God. Have you been faithful in serving God? Have you been like Samuel, and even though he was still a boy, not let one word of the Lord fall to the ground? In other words, you obey Him. If not, something needs to change. And His word and His instructions aren't going to change. We need to change. If there's some way that we can help you be more faithful in your service to God this evening, won't you come to the front now as we stand and sing together?